Well, good evening and welcome to tonight's inaugural lecture given by our wonderful colleague, Professor Jun Du, Professor of Economics here in the Business School. Now, they always say you shouldn't begin with an apology, but I have to apologise. The A team, i.e. the Vice-Chancellor, is stuck in Belfast, and the B team, i.e. our Executive Dean and Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Professor Zoe Radner, is stuck in Milton Keynes. And they both would have really liked to have been here, and they want me to tell you that this is not a comment on how important that this lecture is and how they'd really like to be here. But instead you've got the C team, which is me, and I suppose the thing that I would say, I'm probably more emotionally attached to my friend and colleague Jun than perhaps they are, and so it's the biggest honour for me to do this today. It means a lot to me. So many of you will know about Jun's academic journey, which started with a bachelor's degree in economic management from the Inner Mongolia University. She's chosen to come to Aston when she could be in Inner Mongolia. And on graduation, she worked in the provincial headquarters of the ICBC in China, which is now the largest bank in the world, where she was given creative space to find out who the bank's local competitors were and how they might attract customers and how they could reduce costs. And some of her policy recommendations were put to the CEO, who adopted them, and that was Jun's first experience of being impactful. And she's continued in this way ever since. She had the opportunity to work with mathematicians from the Chinese Science Academy and was fascinated with clustering analysis and principal component analysis. I'm sure many of you in this room could give us a lecture on those. And this sparked her passion for economics. Jun left China to study for a master's degree in international economics, banking and finance at Cardiff Business School, and then went on to complete a PhD in economics from the University of Leicester, where her thesis focused on banking efficiency, access to finance, and firm performance in China. Jun came to Aston University in 2005, in the third year of her PhD, and has been here ever since, most recently taking up her professorship, having established herself as a distinguished applied economist with a primary focus on understanding the intricacies of productivity enhancement and economic growth. Jun's research delves into multi-level dimensions spanning individuals, firms, industries, regions, and governments, with a particular emphasis on both developed and emerging economic context, notably China. With expertise in applied econometric methodologies and utilising microdata from diverse economies, Jun's work has been published in a number of academic journals, and her research has garnered significant external funding from a number of organisations such as the ESRC, Leverhulme Foundation, and many UK government agencies. And she's led prominent productivity research projects and currently serves as the director of the Lloyds Banking Group Centre for Business Prosperity, spearheading projects on UK firm international trade, innovation and productivity. But as if that wasn't enough, Jun is also active as a PhD supervisor, supervising students across a spectrum of research areas ranging from firm performance to innovation diffusion and shaping the next generation of scholars and researchers at Aston University. Away from the university, I'm told that Jun enjoys cooking. She makes a very good cup of tea, traditionally. And I understand she's an excellent chef, and she clearly makes her family a priority. Jun's husband, Mikhail, somewhere there, another good friend of ours, is a senior lecturer here at Aston, And they're both joined tonight with two sons, Larry and Theodore. One here, one there. So you're all extremely welcome, and I hope that you enjoy the evening. I'm sure we will. Jun, you've got to enjoy it as well. So tonight, Jun's lecture focuses on the competition between East and West, sharpened against a background of global challenges, technological upheavals, and pressing environmental crises, leading to the question of whether East or West holds the key to our collective future. She will look at the historical rivalry and contemporary struggles to help understand not just the differences, but the strengths and lessons each brings in our quest for sustainable progress and shared prosperity. Sheila will investigate the evolving landscape of economic governance and consider the spectrum of intervention and autonomy, success and setback, ambition and actuality, catching up and lagging behind. So it's therefore with great pleasure that I invite Professor Jundu to address us and discuss East-West, which is best, state, market, and return of the industrial policy. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Helen. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making the time. I know that after COVID, how difficult it is for people to come in person generally, not to say between 6:30 to 7:30. But I'm here. It's my great pleasure to give this public lecture on a topic that I have been trying to thread together my last 20 years study, thinking on the issues around productivity, growth, progress, the role of state, the balance between the market and state. So hopefully, I'll bring some insights on some of this thinking and reflect on where the way forward should be. When I asked for advice for an inaugural lecture, although it's not really inaugurating, so it's been 8 years I've been professor of economics. But I was advised, okay, it must be accessible, it must be original, it must be insightful, it should have a bit of personal experience, but not too much. But certainly, it needs to be something that people can take away and think about something which and lead to different actions. So this is, I think, what we define as impact. So I've been thinking, what would be an impact lecture? So here is what I'm going to do. I have two objectives. One is really introduce you to this topic of industry policy. Again, this is not new, as I will explain. And thinking about this in a fresh way. This year, 2024, half of the world population will vote for their leaders. For better or worse, these leaders will put in some ideas that reflect the vision of the future. And these visions, plus the plan they're going to propose to put in to fulfill these visions, will decide our shared prosperity, our future. So at the moment, for UK, for example, these thinking is still being shaped, as for many other countries. So really the discussions and debates and thinking around industry policy, do we need industry policy? If we do, how does it look like? How should it look like? And what will be the consequences? Will really impact on our shared future, our own and our children's. So in a way, I think this is important, make or break time of our life to think about these important questions. And as an academic, to really put in what we know, what we can bring as rigorous evidence and systematic thinking beyond just pundit and comments, to really participate and have impact on our shared future. And of course, second objective is to really share a bit of my own research experience, learning journey, and many of my colleagues and team members are here, so it's a bit of reflection of that as well. So hopefully these two objectives are going to be successfully met. And I will do the following. I'll give a bit of context, which might look like taking a bit of time, but I think once we have that context set in, we're all on the same page and speaking the language, it will be easier to go through. And I will talk about why this topic is slightly more complicated than it seems, the complications. And I will tell you a bit of cases, stories, which might tell you more complex picture of what we know from the theory, the evidence, the books. And I will try to draw some lessons. These lessons are not conclusions, but thinking. So hopefully we'll start the dialogue afterwards. And also, I will try to bring a little bit of UK perspective in that as well. And then we discuss the ways forward. Okay, now let's start with quiz. Among all these technologies, which one would you say have been developed using some state intervention, state funds, government? Well done. I'm dealing with a very educated audience. What about these? Well, this corner is supposed to be the engine of a jet engine, okay? The ChatGPT didn't do a good job, but that's jet engine. So again, the answer is yes, because you will see much of the new energy development infrastructure. So given the sheer amount of fixed investment needed, these are by state. What about this? So what you're seeing is microwave, is frying pan, is toothpaste, camera. What about those? Military technology. All of them have been done at the first step by the state. State in a way that is either military or state funded. For example, the frying pan technology, Teflon, has been part of Manhattan Project. It was part of the project which were trying to build nuclear weapons. Camera, the camera technology was actually invented by NASA. So all these wonderful technologies we see today, which made a big impact, probably brought a huge amount of profit, were actually funded partly by the government intervention. And then these familiar names. Can you think of any of those which would be so successful without state funding? The answer is no. Okay, so given that the kind of intervention, the role of government has been so omnipresent, why are we even discussing the role of industry policy? So there are some basic concepts let's just set out before we move on. Market, state, and intervention. So these are very kind of basic concept. I don't think we need much explanation, but roughly, the state is the organization which is supposed to have the authority to put in rules, regulations, and allocate resources, redistribute in order to make sure that some efficiency is maximized, at the same time solve certain problems. And market, as we know, is the kind of mechanism or environment where exchanges can happen between buyer and sellers to exchange for products, services, and resources. And intervention is something between. So when the market is not functioning or market is not believed to be functioning, then some intervention might help to solve the problem. So these are the basic concepts. Now, economic theory believes that market is the most powerful mechanism to allocate resources. So if the market is perfectly functioning, then market should deliver the best efficiency, okay? But of course, market has two problems, two pitfalls. The first pitfall is market failure. Market failure is where market fails. And where does market fail? Market fails when the market is not functioning because there's lack of information symmetry, is because it's public good, therefore there's free riding problem. Think of, building the street light and you charging people to pay for it. If you don't put in some mechanism, nobody will pay for it because it's just free. At the same time, market should not just be considered as the better, the more, the merrier, simply because of market failure. So that shift to the government side. Government may help to resolve some of the market failure problems, but at the same time, market has failures too. Market consists of bureaucrats, public servants. So there's information limitation, there's a boundary of knowledge, there's a lack of efficiency. So all this will make governments fail as well. That is why the balance between the market and state is never clear. So as a result, in reality, there's never a pure state-run or market-run economy. And when we change things, change how things are done, how resources are allocated or redistributed, some interests will be moved. So therefore, we know there are always winners or losers of any policy change. So these are the basic concepts from the economics. Now we can move on. The first thing to say is that the balance between state and market has been going up and down over time. So this was not new, and this is still not new. And I'll come to why we talk about it at this stage. You remember, as economists or generally management or social science, you probably know Adam Smith. Adam Smith was a Scottish economist who was long ago, in 1776, has written a book about how nations' wealth has been determined. And that was the beginning of arguing market was the most powerful mechanism. And of course, there's context to it, because at the time, the state, in a way, was controlling for everything. If you want to plant corn, you need permission. Now, next year, you want to plant wheat, no, you can't. You have to ask for permission again. So at that stage, it was the first industrial revolution, just the eve of that. So there's great need of pivoting and adjusting to what markets needed. So that is why the conceptual development has happened during that time to ask for more role of market. Now moving on to further role deepening of the market up to 1830, where we had Great Depression, and sadly the market has lost some of the function and people lose faith, and that is when the state has come in again. So during that time, there's a great state expansion, and all sorts of countries and states trying to put more planning in it. And that situation has worsened until the pre-World War II. During that time, there's a big discussion about socialist calculation debate. And believe it or not, more economists argued for the state than market. So most economists are trying to calculate how the state can plan in order to deliver the most efficiency compared to the market. And there were only a few economists who were arguing actually market was still the most efficient, although the argument was not from the efficiency point of view, was from the democracy and liberty. And the most famous economist during that time was Schumpeter. Most of people will know Schumpeter argued a creative destruction. So allowing firms to come into the market and to dying in that way, we can actually preserve the most productive functioning firms. At the same time, you have Friedrich Hayek, who's also argued the freedom of the market. Now, during the Second World War, of course, everything was planned, so that wasn't much discussion. And that didn't really change much after the Second World War, when everything was destroyed and the US was put in a Marshall Plan. So many countries, including the industrialized country at the time, for example, France, Germany, Japan, the Netherlands, Germany, of course, were all setting up the state and state-managed and state-owned mechanism to implement the Marshall Plan. So for a long time afterwards, the economic planning and the role of state has been really dominating. In the UK as well, I think for people who remember those times, a lot of firms were state purchased. For example, the car company, aerospace company, railway, and for example, the engineering center, they were all state-owned. And now, what changed that situation is later on in 1970s, when oil price had shot up, and that made manufacturing expensive, and that made planning seems to be powerless because firms couldn't really react to the mechanisms of market very, very quickly. So that's why for those who have read and remember, in 1978 and 79, we had winter of discontent in Britain. So garbage all over the floor, and people were striking, so everything was dysfunctioning. And then that came 1979 when Margaret Thatcher got on board. Then the privatization started, the market started to take place. And this can be reflected in the similar parallel trend from China as well. I put on this timeline for you to see. I don't know whether you can see it. It started from 1976, and that's because 1977, that was one of the most important things has happened. I was born. I was born in 1977. I think I was very fortunate to be born in the age that is going up all the way. So 1976 in China, for those who knew, Chairman Mao died. Cultural Revolution ended, chaotic situations ended. So from 1977-78, that's the period that the economy has been rebuilt because Deng Xiaoping has become in power. So from 1978, that was the beginning of China's opening. In the next about 20 years, private he had important logo. White cat, black cat, it doesn't matter what color, as long as you can capture the mouse. So, that basically means it doesn't matter whether it's socialism or capitalism, as long as you can actually improve people's life, that's a better system. So that's the beginning of the China's opening, and up to 2021, that's also another year of importance because China has entered WTO, and I came to Britain. So during this period is where in China the state has withdrawn and the private has advanced. Now, some of my study has looked into the period after, as here I have suggested. The third generation leader and fourth generation leader of China has basically came to the power, and really halted some of the progress Deng was trying to make. So during that period, seeing the result of the large SOE, state-owned enterprises reform, where 40% of people all lost job, the number of firms and the GDP contribution by the state-owned enterprises dropped to less than 50%. There were a lot of social problems. So given that, there were reverse of the period. I'll mention one of the papers I've done to look into the state advances and private retreat. Now, so that's the China line. In 2015, after a lot of opening and progress, China has announced 2025 of Made in China 2025. And in that very assertive plan, what happened was that a lot of very assertive plan, a very advanced planning have got attention from the West. And as a result, China from that point on was considered an opponent. So the environment for China in the world to operate in the trade, economic, and in other area has reversed. At the same time, as you can see, the 20 years of the best time in Chinese economy were corresponding to the West, the fastest growth period, free liberal economy, the market is being dominant, and that's up to 2028 since the Margaret Thatcher and Reagan time. And what happens is after 2008, with the great financial crisis, we started questioning the role of market again because a lot of depression has happened, and the economy of many countries have never recovered to the past, and UK included. So after that period, there's age of discontent in different ways, and we'll come to a bit of more detail later. And then we move on to 2016 with Brexit referendum, and in the West, in US, 2017, Donald Trump has become the president. So that was even escalating. And as we know now, as the last couple of years, there has been a revival of industrial policy. So the US has the Inflation Reduction Act, the EU has announced Green Deal. So both sides have put in huge amount of money in the plan in order to maintain the supply chain, rebuild the manufacturing, and really exclude some of what they consider as full. So the fragmentation of the global value chain now is going through a different phase. At the same time, we are facing a different kind of crisis, climate crisis, social crisis, the discontent, the inclusivity. So this is the period that a lot of consensus the West has built over the last 20, 30 years now being questioned. So for middle power country like Britain, this is a time really to rethink of industrial policy, because for the last 20, 30 years, industrial policy was not much a question. because the market should function, and that's what we should rely on. Now, given that, let's move on to the complication of industry policies. Industry policy, or sometimes called industry policy, strategy, what do we mean by it? It basically means the intervention aimed at changing the distribution of resources across economic sectors and activities, or strategic efforts by government to encourage the development and growth of specific sectors and industries within the economy. As we mentioned before, the rationale is essentially that the government can fill in some of the gaps the market can fail. Broadly, there are two camps of thinking. One is a horizontal kind of industry policy where you support everyone. So the idea is to build a good ecosystem that everybody should survive or could thrive. While vertical industry policy is to pick winners. So suppose some of the sectors are being supported where other sectors might be sacrificed or be treated as a cost. That is vertical industry policy. There are numerous examples to explain these two types of industry policies, but most of the times you will see that these industry policies serve a few broad goals. One is technological advancement and innovation. For example, China made 2025, that was to build high-tech advanced manufacturing and infrastructure. We have UK's catapult centers. That is also to build advanced manufacturing and life and health sectors. Taiwan, for example, had specific industry strategy to build semiconductor. And similarly, Germany's Industry 4.0 was meant to be supportive of building Industry 4.0 technologies. Now, there are industry policies which help economic competitiveness and sector development. Just, for example, France has put in a huge amount of money to build aerospace, which make French aerospace sector one of the most competitive in the world today. There are strategic industry support for export as well. There are broadly two kind of camps. One is to substitute import. The other one is to drive export. China used to build a lot of export promoting strategy, and this can be found in many developing countries, Brazil, for example. So some of these were considered successful, others are not quite. If not used successfully, countries might be trapped at a very low bottom of global value chain. And there are industry policies which help capacity building. For example, India's pharmaceutical policy. And there's a digital and cultural transformation, which is omniscient for many sectors and touching people's daily life. And instead of focusing on specific sectors, for example, Estonia. If you go to Estonia today, you'll be very impressed by how the whole society is e-driven and is efficient, and this infrastructure is being new, and people are thinking digital. So that's the result of that. And then, of course, there are industry policies which are not really for economic purposes or benefit. For example, for national prestige and confidence. One good example is China's shipping building industry. It was completely not a good deal to build it, but for China, because we had a history of building the ship and touring around conquering, having adventures abroad. So building a strong ship industry was very important. So China's shipbuilding industry has took off in 10 years, which has really taken up more than 30 to 50% of all market share within 10 years. Okay, so how do you know whether, because we see the support of governments and intervention all the time, but how do you spot what are the tools that the governments are using to implement industry policy? The answer is many. So when we first think about it, we probably are thinking about tax and subsidies. So, by punishing or by rewarding, you change incentives of the behavior, but actually the tools of industry policy are much more than that. So you could use competition, you could use regulation, you could use public ownership as the extreme of, putting state's role. You could use, for example, training program and developing your skills. So the toolbox is huge, and it's up to the state to use it and understand the implication of using it. So what do we know about the effect? Does it work? from the literature, because this is not a new literature. There's a large body of work led by many very famous economists. So obviously, when a huge amount of money put in by governments to do something, it's of interest for people to know whether that has worked a lot. So the first thing to say is that it's exceptionally difficult to evaluate it, simply because it's about counterfactual. We will never really know what happens to the UK trade or inflation if we never Brexit it, right? So it is very difficult. So we are talking about counterfactual. And when you put in a policy intervention, a policy, equally we don't really know. And there's complications that behind all this implementation as well. But from the economic research point of view, the most difficult thing is, number one, you really don't know how the policy is implemented most of the time. Because when the policymakers put in such policy, most of the time they don't have the evaluation in mind. So, they often think about the evaluation, or the researchers think about the evaluation much later after the policy has been implemented. So no one quite know how that subsidy was given, what's the criteria, who got it, what are the signaling, who failed it, because in order to evaluate well, you really know who failed it and applied as well. So because of all this, it's really difficult. But overall, the body of literature suggests that the effect is mixed. Wow, what a surprise. So it's mixed. But what we know is that the success or failure of implementing industry's policy really has to do with what it is that's implemented, how it is implemented, who implemented, and the specific context applicable. So the evidence ranges from very significant. For example, in South Korea, that I will talk a little bit more, the effect was significant. It put South Korea's industrialization from 100 years to 20. So that's the evaluation, if we take the evidence as it is. And then there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it might do something, but for this group of people, that industry, for a period of 2 years. So most of the positive evidence ranges from this range. But then there's equally amount of evidence to suggest that there's no effect, and actually it's counterproductive. As you can see, that's why the debate is needed, because we really don't know when we put in some policy intervention what would happen, who would be the winner and losers, and how should we think of it? Okay, now, what is the problem? So if we think about industry policy and you implement it, we always start with a good intention. We want to be competitive in this way. We want to build, skills in that way. We want to access to a certain market. So what is the problem of implementing industrial policy? Number one, so let's talk about within a country. So suppose, within the UK, within China or Germany. So if you implement, intervene, have that intervention, what could be the problem? The problem, number one, is resource misallocation. There's a lot of work in this area to talk about when you budget, even it's not huge amount, massive amount, still a certain amount of resources, it's always questionable whether the resources could be used in different places to have better effect or to distribute more evenly. So the opportunity cost of that resources is what's in concern. I've written a paper looking at the period I've just highlighted to you after I came to the UK and when China started reverting that period. What we saw is that Chinese state-owned firms have reduced. The first line, as you can see, so this is the number of SOE, the operating scales, although 50% of firms are gone, their operating scales, which is basically the average total assets, has shot up. And so there was discussion, and at the same time, because they are sheerly large, so they have a lot of market power, there were suspicion about whether that was actually have negative spillover or impact on other firms. So this paper was looking at exactly that. I only put in one equation there. I know this is not a case of explaining to any regression, but that is the way of thinking. I'll explain. Now, this equation explains for an economy, the average productivity is composed of three things. One, the growth of average productivity of the surviving firms. So if all the firms in the economy, if all of them on average are more productive, then the economy is more productive. The second thing is how well the resources can allocate to help the better firms to show up in the market and to die. So if a market is not functioning well, then the bad performing firms are not dying, the new firms cannot come in, then you don't have productivity growth. So the resources, the better resources are allocated to allow more entry, productive ones, and more exit, the bad ones, then the productivity is higher. So that's the second source. So second and third, and exit and entry. So essentially, if we can calculate how much the overall productivity growth can be explained by how well you help the existing firms to be better, and how well you can actually eliminate bad ones and let the new ones come in and they are productive, then we can explain how this resource allocation has been efficient or not. So this paper demonstrated over that period, although we see large SOEs are dying, there are a lot of young firms coming in, but what we found is the resource allocation has been worsening significantly. So even there are less number of firms, but we see that the productive firms do not become larger. The firms becoming larger are the less efficient ones. And the firms which enter are not the most productive ones. And the least productive firms are not dying when they should die. So this is a kind of a conclusion we draw. It's a period of state advances and private retreat. So that indicated a kind of retreat and backward development of China. Now, the second problem is rent-seeking and corruption. So imagine if resource allocation in the economy, in the country, is really depending on the administrative discretion. What could happen? You might have some really brilliant manager and leader who can actually, do the best job, but can you count on it? So from economic point of view, this kind of mechanism would leave gaps for rent-seeking and corruption. So in here, we have published a few papers, and one paper is with Tomek over there. We talked about the subsidy giving and the rent-seeking behavior of China. So in one paper in the entrepreneurship theory and practice, what we found is that private firms in China during that period of time have spent considerable time and money in entertaining bureaucrats, trying to get loans, trying to get less tax, and trying to get some backdoors to break the glass ceiling to entry. So that's the ETP paper. And with Tomek, we kind of calculated how the subsidies is distributed to see where it's distributed more evenly or less evenly. That has implication on the startups and young firms. So as we can see, what happens is that young firms spend significant amount of productive time and resources in basically working with bureaucrats and state and the governments in order to get the resources they needed. And this is shameful waste of resources. And that is the evidence of rent-seeking. Now, there's another side of the story, which is, if you offer firms subsidy and help them, is that the end of the story? So imagine if we help you to put in resources to upgrade your technology. In theory, you should be better. So even that, the evidence is mixed. But we could, imagine on average, the firms which receive subsidies or help, they would do better. But then the question is, okay, you can't help everyone. So what if you help those, and that had impact on the market they are operating, which might have negative impact on others? Now, in economics, it's incredibly difficult to evaluate this indirect spillover effect of the treatment. So this paper that's published in Canadian Journal of Economics after 5 years of endeavor, which really documented this using some state-of-the-art methodology to really evaluate the spillover effect of the treatment within the cell. So we look into what happens to firms' productivity and outputs and inputs after they receive subsidies. And not surprisingly, firms receive subsidy, they indeed perform better. But what hasn't been documented before, but we found in this paper, is that for an industry and a region, if there are more firms receiving subsidies, the rest of the firms grow less in productivity, in outputs, in all sorts of dimensions. So that is a very strong evidence to say, okay, you might help some firms, but overall, as economy, as industry, the effect is negative. So this is a paper that we've got this year's Harry Johnson Prize. That's rewarded for the best paper published in 2023 by Canadian Journal of Economics. Okay, that's within the border. Resource misallocation, rent-seeking, and negative spillover. What is the problem beyond? So is it okay if a country just subsidize your sector and make them super productive, like in China, the photovoltaic industry, where they sell all the solar panels, and would that have impact on others? So this is where there's national arguments and debates on that precisely. So the first thing we want to say is that overuse of subsidy in the inappropriate way will endanger the level playing field and distortion to competition. This is the good example is China's shipbuilding. So a very wonderful paper published in 2022 looking at the shipbuilding industry in China in Review of Economic Studies has documented this. And through the causal analysis, they discovered that China's shipbuilding project has basically diminished Japan's industry by 50%. So this kind of use of subsidy and intervention does not only impact on one's own economy, but to the world economy. The overcapacity has always been a concern. Just now I mentioned about the solar panel technology. Solar panel technology. So at the moment, over 90% of all solar panels were made in China. And why is that a problem? On the one side, we want that because we want the world to be near to net zero. But on the other hand, because of the subsidy and overcapacity by the suppliers from China, that pressed the price to such a low level, and therefore other producers cannot compete. And when the other producers cannot compete, what do? They shift to do other things, right? So the whole industry of some economies are completely eliminated. So as a result, this is a huge problem because it goes beyond. It basically eliminated some of the crucial or strategic industries Western countries consider. And that has caused a lot of problems. So the overcapacity also is an issue. At the same time, it undermined the trust and fair system. So one of the interesting fact is that after the EU has announced a Green Deal, which is huge amount of money, what happens is that it hasn't really gone through smoothly as well as US. US RIA now has grown over $1 trillion from at the beginning 360 billion. Now it's grown to $1 trillion, and it's been used in many places. Of course, there are hiccups and the places that didn't work. For example, the skills are very lacking and they can't hire labor. But in the EU, the problem is entirely different. Why? Because in the EU, one of the fundamental values for the European Union is is a level playing field. So to distribute the subsidy by national government instead of EU range, that has created a lot of issues of whether that's fair, where you distribute, and how do you evaluate, and how do you balance between country and between the provinces of the country. So that has been quite difficult. Okay. I'm going to tell you some stories which might be interesting. So the first thing is South Korea. So South Korea is a very interesting case. As you probably know, because South Korea was one of the East Asian miracles among several other countries. But I don't know whether you know, South Korea after the Second World War, especially after North Korean War, it was completely a rundown place. Everything was destroyed. It was just the basic living standard was not met. And South Korea has been with strong support of US for many, many years. But in the 60s, when Nixon started putting his policy to withdraw that, South Korea was completely devastated, because without the technology or the resources from US, South Korea was facing basically the total collapse. So this third president, his name is called Park Chung-hee. We translate everything in Chinese. Sometimes we cannot correspond the name. So this person was the third president who was assassinated later. He had a military background. So what he wanted to do, and then he put in his industry policy, was to rebuild the military base, rebuild the heavy industry. So he had a very interesting industry policy called heavy chemical industry policy. So the whole industry was supposed to build a strong base for manufacturing. At the same time, build skills and build independent military. It's an integrated model of national industry standard model. So Nathan Lane from Oxford has written several papers on this. It's absolutely fascinating. If you have time, have a read. So what it does, that it explains the context, explain how it's done, and it did causal analysis. So what he has found is that through this program, which implemented for about 5-6 years, building on the base that they've done in earlier intervention period. And what they found is that South Korea has built the industry base in 20 years, which would take a century for other countries. Very interestingly, so what South Korea has created is not only just the base as itself, but it's dynamic capability and dynamic comparative advantage. And that spilled to other industries, not just the heavy industry, but it's spilled to all the manufacturing sectors and the service sectors as well. So as a result, within 10-20 years, South Korea has become one of the most successfully industrialized the countries in the world. Of course, here, I added, this is not in Lane's paper, the condition for such success in South Korea, one of those at least, is the absolutely absolutely authoritarian way of organizing the delivery. So without the absolute power of Park Chung-hee, it would never be possible. So that creates some doubts in this kind of program, whether that can be implemented in such a way with the same effect in other countries. And at the same time, what's interesting is most of these technologies that South Korea has been built has always followed the route of following. So whenever US or other countries have some technology, they would very quickly follow up, throw a lot of money in, build it, and then maybe improve it. In very few occasions, South Korea actually created some brand new, radical, disruptive technologies. So there's always a question about whether South Korea has ever equipped with this ability to jump from 0 to 1. That's one thing. The other thing is, during this period, one of the side effects of the economy is the creation of what's so-called chaebol. Chaebol is essentially large industry group, which has been dominated by individual or family. So, for example, Samsung or Hyundai. So these businesses are created as a business group. And if you look at what this business group do, they almost do everything in the economy. So it's impossible to compete with them. So as a result, nowadays, in the current economy of South Korea, it is stifled, the kind of industry dynamism. Startup and new firms are very difficult to enter and to survive. And as a result, not surprisingly, the innovation, especially the radical innovation, is very limited. I want to show you a story of Chinese EV. So that's the second case, also the last case I'm telling you. I want to tell you the story in a way that you can actually see some interesting facts yourself, and then we can talk about what we learn from that. This is a small, quick video. So this is China's rise of global car production dominance, not EV, generally car. So you might pay attention to China and UK and Japan. China was not in the picture at the beginning. So, I think it's nothing short of a miracle. Now, that is total production. In terms of exports of Chinese cars, it took China 55 years to export 55 million cars. And then for the next million, it took 10 years. And for the next million to export between 2 to 3 million, it took a year. So I think it's a very interesting case to think about this, because when the West talk about the automotive industry in China and the EVs, very immediately it is subsidy. It is not just subsidy. I think it's worth studying as a case to think about what are the conditions to make this success and whether some of these can be replicated. Okay, here what you see here is the total production of cars in China over time. It really, between 1980, there was really nothing. And then over time, it grew. But from this, I don't expect you to read in detail, but these are the timelines of the foreign investment entering in China. As you can see, over time, a lot of companies entered and made joint venture. Not much is being produced. And then really it's taking off when the red bits coming out, and that is the indigenous innovation happening. So these are the companies which were private and independent and innovative in its own right. So it's strange because most of the multinationals are very successful companies, right? From Germany, from US, from various places. Why it took them so long to do so little? So how come it was taken over by Chinese cars? Why? What happened? So I'm going to tell you a story which you might have find something to explain. The first point I want to make is that these foreign invested companies in China, they went there not to innovate. So it took China a long time, over 10, 15 years time to really rethink about the model of market for technology, because that was the beginning of this industrial strategy. The industrial strategy of China at the time was to really, use market to get technology, because at the beginning of China there was no foreign currency. It's a very poor country. You could simply not buy technology. So as a result, the strategy of the government thought about is to say, okay, let's give some market. Let them produce, let them take cheap labor, cheap material, let them produce, and maybe along the way we can learn some technology. So that was a strategy for about 20 years. And as you can see here, I don't expect you to see a lot. So what happens, two colors. The front color panel is the market for technology strategy. Those are the collaborated company, the joint venture with the West. And though the last column is the number of the models of the cars that's been produced in 10 years. Okay, so once they establish how many new models they produce within 10 years can show how active they are in innovating. And as you can see, not much. Volkswagen being in China for 10 years, the only model they produce is Santana. And then the lower bottom are the 10 years after the new indigenous firms. They have entered China, they have entered the market for 10 years, and these are the models they produce in exactly the same time span. I guess you can see the conclusion. At the same time, if you look at patents, so if you think about the engine-related patents are the core technology for automotive industries. So what happens is that if we compare the number of the patents that these companies have registered in China, and you will see some differences. For example, the joint ventures, the highest one is the one with General Motors, which granted patents for 64 years, and that is for from 1980 to 2022. So as you can imagine, for all these 40-something years, the total patents they register is 64. And then if you see Toyota, Honda in China, they registered one over 40 years. So this is engine related. And if you look at the companies themselves, not joint ventures, they register patents in China to make sure the intellectual properties are protected. You will see a huge different number, 2016, 48, that's from Toyota over the same period, but it's nothing to do with the Chinese producer or their joint ventures. So the strategy has been quite clear. And at the same time, the indigenous firms are not so innovative, but their average patents is about 400. These are two pieces of evidence to suggest really the joint venture as a way to secure technology has failed. So what made the automotive industry in China, really boom? And I want to tell you very briefly a BYD story. So this is Wang Chuanfu. Wang Chuanfu is the CEO of BYD. BYD, I don't know whether you know, it's probably now the most successful EV car producers in the world. He calls himself the number one engineer of the company, not CEO or manager. He's a very interesting person. So I'm going to tell very briefly what happened with his story, and then you can pick some interesting facts. He's actually about 11 years older than me, so born in 66, and he started being an academic. He was academic in a research institute to study colored metals. and he studied chemistry. So he had a fundamental knowledge about how to produce battery. That's all he knew. And after he got scholarship to study a master degree to study the metals, because he was a very good student, and he got scholarship to continue. And afterwards, he was given a job to supervise a research institute studying metals and battery. And that was the year when China started being opened, and there are a lot of opportunities. At the same time, because the world becomes safer and peaceful, the military has been cut, significantly, and therefore, so a lot of people are coming to the market, what we call going down to sea. So basically, started setting up companies to try different business ideas. He observed an opportunity. At the time, Japan was trying to abandon the existing nickel battery technology. So he proposed to the head of the institute and the government to say, can we produce that? Because it's an opportunity. We would like to produce the lithium, because that's when Japan was starting to jump to lithium batteries that today has been used so widely. He asked, can we do that? Because I think we can figure out how to do it. And after a long term of application and trying to build a proposal, the answer was no. You do your research. This is not in budget. It's not your plan. So as a result, he quit. He is really a bookish person, but he quit the job. And he got the first gold from his relative who happened to have a bit of money, spare money, and gave him the money to set up the first factory to produce batteries. And what he did is that he used his techniques in technology and started building the batteries. And in 10 years' time, he has become the world's largest battery producers, and supplied batteries to a lot of companies like Motorola, Nokia. Now, after he's been listed on the stock market, he got a bit of money, and then he decided, okay, it's time to divert and diversify. He chose two sectors: one, semiconductor; two, car. At the time, he did not know how to drive when he bought the first car company. But he had this vision that in the world, because China is lack of petrol, oil in general, and it is so polluted that people are having a lot of issues with pollution. So in the long run, this has to go. So alternative energy has to come in, and that was 2003, long time ago. So he did that. He started building that. He bought the first. At the time, it's also very restricted. He couldn't be permitted to produce car. So he bought a rundown car company to start experimenting. And that was 2003. And when he bought that car factory, his stock price dropped about 50% on the same day. Because at the time, the battery market grew at 80% per year, and the car industry grew only 3%. So that was deemed as a very bad choice. He did it anyway, and he spent a long time and failed project, a lot of investment in trying to understand how the car is being made. He learned his car, he learned from textbooks how car works, etc. So that was the beginning of the car making procedure. But in this process, he has figured out two things. One, global value chain, in his mind, in his words, global value chain is a facade. Global value chain is a way that existing players keep the interest within themselves. So because when he approached to German producers Bosch to buy some tools, they will charge very high price and they cannot afford. And when they actually make the same tools and they try to supply in the global market, and Bosch would press the price by more than 70%, and in the end leave no profit at all. So in his mind, you have to do it yourself. You have to make the parts yourself. That's one of the reasons the company has set up vertical integration. So the company is literally doing from design to making the parts and making the assembly and producing the car. In 2014, this success has brought attention. Actually, slightly earlier than that, has brought success, attention from the state. So this is one mechanism that innovation in China has happening from the below. So as a result, the government has been supporting the program, and a lot of policies regarding the new energy spreading and infrastructure building, for example, charging station, has been actually built through the companies like BYD. Now, in 2013, when he decided to switch to EV, that was also had a lot of setback. Another car company has set up in China. That was Tesla. So in the next few years, his EV has grown worldwide. And one of the really interesting things he has done is through the vertical integration, the cost has been pressed so low, and they managed to sell similar cars with similar function with about half of the price. But in 2016, the company has decided to open up the vertical integration. So instead of continue with vertical integration, it tries to bring market in. So he set up the policy of different departments producing the parts. If you are competitive, if you are the best producing the parts you produce, you should be able to sell in the market as well. So in that way, it further pressed efficiency seeking from the departments. Now, in the next few years, it's further gained from the early investment from making the chips and making the battery, and later on, the company also developed the navigating system and other smart device and autonomous system. In 2020, this company has been most prominent in helping with COVID. It's an interesting tale because BYD has about 220,000 workers in China. So as you can imagine, it needs double amount of masks every day. So what the company does is within 3 days, it redesigned the whole process of making masks. Within 7 days, it built a machine to start from the beginning, the material and assembling it and making large mass production. And in 7 days, it has produced all the masks needed and local. In 24 days, BYD has become the largest mask producer of the world. So this is the ability to innovate. I think I need to speed up. So I guess, I don't know whether you have seen that video when Elon Musk was interviewed in 2009 to ask, what do you think of the competitors in China like BYD? And he had this famous interview, which is very famous. Everybody watched it and laughed because he was just laughing, couldn't stop laughing. He says, have you seen their car? It's not really a very good car. I think they should really focusing on how to survive domestically. So now, in a few 13 years later, this company has sold more cars than BYD. And in 2022, China has actually sold more cars to Chinese consumers than foreign invested companies for the first time. And that dominance of foreign direct investment in China for Chinese consumers has been for 38 years. And today, in 2023, the company has revenue $84 billion. Okay, to summarize what we have learned, the first thing is that at the very beginning, the poor country will start from exporting for cash to get some currency to buy technology. And then the countries like China would buy technology. But buying technology probably is not enough. So in order to speed that up, China has adopted a market for technology. But market for technology has never worked. And that can be found in many other developing countries as well. So that's why in the global value chain literature, a lot of people talking about why the Washington Consensus has never been successful. A lot of poor countries have remained developing forever. And some explain that because they haven't been pre-industrialized before the global value chain. But I think that the trick is that you've got to innovate along the line. It's not about industrialization, it's about innovation. And for indigenous innovation in China, it took the approach from imitating to innovate. For example, the CEO of the BYD has bought 50 cars at the beginning just to disassemble it and try to put it back. So that's the way to learn. And then started imitating the technology by using 4 pieces from Toyota, 1 piece from Volkswagen, put them together and then improve. So that means there are 2 ways to do this. One is to learn, to get technology and learn. The other one really is to do. The real learning and innovation has to come from doing it. And the policy adoption and the pivoting and the response to what business need is also something exemplary. So whether the market and government can respond by providing the environment, the infrastructure for business to thrive is very, very crucial. In order to maintain that maintain the learning to keep open is absolutely essential. So this is something that West has been always doing well, but China and developing countries now are facing the kind of less friendly environment. So this opening is absolutely crucial. Learn from the foreign direct investment, learn from collaboration, learn from skills from diaspora and migrants. So this has been documented as a very strong sense of source of learning. Okay. We'll have a quick brief of lessons. So this is to reflect how to jump from 0 to 1, the real innovation. So the indigenous innovation is absolutely the centerpiece for a low start either industry or an economy. And to dynamically learn and get a comparative advantage is the mechanism to improve. And keep openness is absolutely essential. And the learning is really obtained from doing it. So that is why the West, especially the US in the last 10, 20 years, have documented a lot of evidence to suggest that when the outsourcing happened, a lot of foreign investment moved away. What is gone was not just production, it's the opportunity to innovate. So that together with the China shock literature, that was the backdrop of the Trump government to start rebuilding the manufacturing base. And I don't think that thinking has been really examined in the context of Europe. Now, providing the right condition is what industry policy should be. The competition should really to enable collaboration and allow the allocative and productive efficiency to realize. The creative industry, creative destruction by the end of the day, to use entrepreneurship innovation is the only sustainable source of growth. And picking winners. So we'll come to that maybe in a bit. Now, very quickly, for the UK. UK is now in a very uncomfortable place, right? After 2008, the economy has not really recovered. Productivity is very low. Some argue it's because of low investment. So as you can see, the investment of UK compared to all the peers in G7 has been low, and has been low for a long time. So without investment, the technology doesn't really upgrade, and a lot of opportunities might missed. And some of our work has documented in specific aspect of that dismay. For example, the recent work we've done to look at UK trade has really observed the UK exports, the last one that you probably won't even see, that's where UK export is relative. So that's UK export growth in the last 3 years relative to everyone else. This is a combination of Brexit and maybe other things like COVID. But one of the most fundamental and very, very difficult issue is short-termism. A lot of decisions are made and withdraw and change, so there's lack of consistency, lack of coordination, and there's a kind of avoidance of addressing long-term problems and investment. So UK recently, last year, has decided to postpone the 5-year delay on the ban on the sales of new petrol and diesel cars. According to insiders from the car sectors, within that day, the UK automotive industry has lost 1 billion because consumers on that day canceled order. So for a lot of factories and producers, they have already put in investment. That's obviously a loss. So this is only one example. The implementation and the evaluation are patchy. So their policies changing every now and then. And when you look at the key industries, for example, the automotive industry and EV, we see that UK is lagged. In many ways. For example, this report on the EV, we're really documenting that. And thinking of, for example, the car manufacturing industry is so crucial for jobs, as you can see, especially for where we are, the Midlands, it's disproportionately important in every way, the value-added product, the outputs, the jobs, the opportunity to innovate and exports. So this is one of the very big questions we have to tackle. And there are other concerns as well. I probably don't have time to go through. But for example, long-term skills problem, a very dated infrastructure. There's industry concentrations happening as a result. The innovation is stifled, and there's a regional disparity. Therefore, it's very difficult to reach the kind of balanced and agreeable plan to go forward. Now, good industry policy from what we have seen, how it should be. From the design, there are a lot of discussion at the moment happening. I think one of the fundamental questions we have to ask ourselves is, if we have industry policy, what do we want it to achieve? What does it want to achieve? Is it a growth? Is it innovation? Is it revival of some sectors? Is it a rebalancing of some sort? Is it leveling up because that's different from growth? Is it independence from some dependence of, I don't know, material or something else? So without a very clear objective, it is really difficult to come up with industry policy or plan, because that will be conflicting and there will be, along the way, barriers to implement. Now, strategy is very different from planning. So most of the time we hear strategy, it's a set of wishful thinking and planning. It does not really strike as strategy. So there needs to be more serious discussion about how strategy should be made, not only just building on what you have been great in the past, what you are doing today, but what everyone else is being investing and what they could be great tomorrow. So the strategy needs to be done in a very coherent and forward-looking way. Now, Roderick and Mazzucato recently have got a new paper talking about industry policy with conditionalities. So this means that since now we are accepting the industry policy must be done, what's really important is to have the conditionality. We build some sectors, some group of industries or firms, that's fine, but what's the condition? How we can make sure the benefit is not going to be enjoyed just by the ones who enjoy the benefit, but also spread in the society. And I think it's really important to think about this in an alignment way, because at the moment, most of the Western economies have this relatively disjoint. The skills people talking about skill policy, the trade people only talk about trade policy without other things, and investment policy, and there's industry policy, innovation policy, tax policy. So do they join? The answer is clearly no. So when they don't join, we might be trying to develop a creative sector as well as financial sector and manufacturing. The resources will not be enough and they will be disjointed. So this is one of the big problems as well. And also the whole nation approach. One of the big characteristics of the developing countries and South Korea and Japan is the whole nation approach. I'll tell you a very interesting contrast. When someone did a survey asking young people in secondary school, what do you want to become when you grow up? Over 70% of the children in US and the UK said they want to be X Factor or superstar, pop idol. So there are different programs, but they want to become pop star. When such questions were asked in China, 90% of children want to be astronaut. This is not industry policy, but it's a result of industry policy. So how do you bring people along and have that buy-in when you want to implement something? This is something that in a liberal democratic society we should think about. Okay, a long-term approach, I've mentioned those. So only with long-term approach the business would have confidence to invest, and therefore long-term approach can lead to long-term development and technology upgrading. And Singapore last month has announced one new policy. Everybody, as soon as they reach 50 years old, they will be able to get the funding to do another undergraduate. All paid, you have the time, you have the money. If you want to train yourself, go ahead. Food for thought. Okay, I think this is probably the last. Any industry policy, no matter how the shape is, what shape and what does it do, it needs to fulfill and support competition, because only through competition, resources can be allocated in the most efficient way, and it promotes spillovers and stimulates business dynamism, entrepreneurship, and innovation. And innovation needs to be the centerpiece of the progress. And the very end, the winners and losers are necessary outcome of any industry policy. So thoughts need to be given of how to compensate on the losers. For example, just now, that policy to help 50 years above to go to re-educate, that is one way of compensating the losers, isn't it? So you give them not just a fish, but the skills to how to fish. So some creative ways have to be thought about to compensate losers in order to make the society be more harmonious. I think I'll skip this. this is one example, but I guess my point is all the policies need to be joined together. So at the moment, for example, when you hear people talking about trade policy, they don't quite talk about industry policy. That space is empty. So any policy really should fit into the national industry policy. And we have a report tomorrow coming out, and it will be in the Financial Times talking about how we can improve the Brexit deal. So there's some discussions we can follow up on that. And in terms of trade and investment, that is one of the most important performance indicator of a nation, because if you have that competitiveness and have the superior product and services, you trade. So we have several projects looking into what might drive firms to trade and how to trade longer, more sustainably, and how barriers can be removed to help trading better. There are a lot of opportunities. I guess this is something that's familiar to everybody. UK has the best scientists, best universities, is free, and it's a free thinking place, and it's more equal than ever. And to be honest, I feel I have been treated more fairly and with respect in Britain than anywhere else in the world. I think it's the place that people can talk, can share views, and with that, with the superior culture, influential culture, with the mechanism to really learn and strive, I think there are loads of opportunities. And also geographically, I think UK is in a really good position to be the middleman, not just politically, but also economically and socially. I guess the conclusion of the lecture, I think I overrun it now. There's no such thing as the best. None is best, but all comes with pros and cons, and with intended and unintended consequences. It's really important for us to understand those and provide insights with strong and robust evidence for the decision makers to make decisions which impact on everyone. Very last, I think I need to say a few things about the gratitude. This is my family. I have to thank my family because my sister is sitting there. My parents have been the reason that I had double amount of time in my last 20 years. They came here 8 times, every time stay 6 months, and I could stay in my office until 10, 11 o'clock when I wanted to. So absolutely if there's any success, I'm indebted to my parents in a very significant way. And my husband, I am very fortunate that I married my best friend from PhD course. So there's a huge amount of support, and my 2 boys are exceptional, and they are tolerant. And they gave me the reason and rationale to be disciplined, to be knowledgeable, at the same time preventing me to drip into complete and utterly and extreme workaholism. So I thank them for that. Yesterday I did a quick thing because I should thank my co-authors, because from every single one of them I have learned, honestly learned, good or bad I have learned. And I did very quickly from the Explorer. These apparently are the people I've worked with and published with, not worked. There are a lot of people I'm working now we've never published yet, and they are not here. So in 2 years' time, there will be even more. But specifically, there are some thanks I should give. Nigel is not well, Nigel is not here. Nigel has always been the career advisor for me. So from the very beginning, Surfel has been my supervisor of the PhD thesis, and he brought me to microeconometrics, and he used to reply to my emails at 12 o'clock in the night when I was stuck in Stata. So even today, he's teaching me things. And we're going to do some work with machine learning, in the foreseeable months. Mark Hart. Mark cannot be here because he had a medical appointment this afternoon, but Mark has been strolling to my office for many years. When his office was still in main building, he would come to nudge me, do something on UK. You are great, but China is not the most important topic now. Work on the UK. So I think partially I moved towards UK topics and now do so much more of it was partially because of Mark. Tomek partially promoted me. I was promoted to reader and chair. Partially, I need to thank Tomek, but that's not the reason I thank Tomek. There was one point I was thinking to leave, and Tomek told me, think about building a place, not picking up a place. So I abide by that, and I think I've done that just well. I hope you agree. My very successful co-author, Sasha, in the last few years, I've been working with Sasha intensively. And I think the kind of trust and seamless collaboration I built with Sasha is the most enjoyable thing in work life. So thanks for that. And Liu Xiaohui is a very famous professor in China. She has taught me so much about the program of privatization, and I learned a lot of the things you don't learn from textbook from her. And Steve was my first boss in here. He gave me a job as research fellow in Aston University when I was still doing my PhD. He had faith in me to complete my thesis in time. So Steve so far has still been collaborating. So he showed me a lot of things. He showed me not to dwell too much in the past and look forward. So even today, I'm still collaborating and learn from Steve. The last person is not somebody I worked with. I don't know whether you know. This is Reza Vogel. He was a professor in Harvard. He was the person who wrote Deng Xiaoping book. And when I was invited for a panel discussion in Harvard a few years ago, I had great pleasure. It's a privilege to meet him. He was 95 years old at the time. He speaks fluent Chinese and Japanese. He wrote many books for the West to understand Japan and China, how they work. And he showed me what a true scholar should be. So every time I think about how I should develop and be humble and help, that is the model in my mind. These are all the funders and stakeholders I've worked with, and many funded research, but others showed me how to be impactful and what are the real questions to ask. So that's much appreciated. And in the last few years, I've worked closely for and with Center for Business Prosperity. I think I must say thanks to George. Without George, there wouldn't be such a center. And I'm deeply grateful for the time and resources and guidance he has given to me over the years to shape the center. And also, I learned from him how to write. He used to sit down with me, change line by line, and tell me why that sentence is more powerful than the other one. So for all the success I have since for the very beginning, a few years for the center, I think George is a person I'm deeply grateful to. And my team. So I have dream teams. So because I'm running out of time, I'm not saying more, but it's really, really great pleasure and privilege to work with such a group of productive and efficient and intelligent and trusting friends and colleagues. And of course, it cannot be done without the support of university. So over the years, I've got support from Nicholas in the past, and recent years from Helen and Zoe and Alex. So every time we have important occasions, and they always come out to support us. And of course, one of my great pleasure is to work with my students. So I've now completed 12 PhD supervisions, and I have many happening. So they are the reason that I need to learn more in order not to be a disaster or disappointment. So they push me learn all the time. So I'm grateful for them too. Okay. Thank you very much. I think I probably have overdone it, but thank you for attention. I think this is the moment that academics have great opportunity to be impactful. There's never better time. This is the best time. So let us take this as a voyage, try to open some doors it hasn't opened before, and try to challenge some existing boundaries, and really bring the learning into reality and make impact that we can impact. For our shared future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everybody, in the room and online for joining us this evening. And a big thank you, of course, to Professor Zhondu. Better late than never, as they always say. So we really, really enjoyed that. Of course, I think you've definitely met your aims of being accessible, sharing some insights, and being really, really engaging. Now, certainly from the university perspective, we're really, really keen to have Jun this year, giving her inaugural, because you represent something far more than your subject at the university. Hopefully some of you in the room will be aware, but the university has been on a 15-year journey to now be the second in England to have what is called the Athena Swan Gold Award, which recognises gender equality in higher education. Of the professors within the country, only 28% at the moment are women. If we slice that down by other social and wider demographics, we're talking about very, very few women in certain kinds of identity areas that are represented in higher education. So thank you for being part of the university's journey towards the Athena Swan Gold as well. So thank you once again for joining us. On behalf of Professor Helen Higson, our Deputy Dean, Professor Mark McCormack, and myself, Shivani Sharma, the Deputy Dean, People, Culture, Inclusion, that was our last inaugural for this academic year.
June, we'd like to give you a couple of gifts. This is a medal, which is the latest thing that we now give to commemorate the event.
Thank you so much.
So keep inspiring, keep acting as a role model, and if you've learned anything and you have contact with either your own children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, get them all into batteries is all I can say. Thank you. See everybody outside.